JavaScript's ascendance has caught many people by surprise. Fluent Conference co-chair Peter Cooper explains why it happened and how it happened in this episode of O'Reilly Radar. So can you tell me how and when you first got involved with JavaScript?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much in the same way that a lot of people got into JavaScript over the years, which is pretty much by accident. You know, you have perhaps a web design job to do, or you're working on your own site or something like that, and you needed something that added a bit of extra functionality to the page. So it's like, how can I do that? JavaScript. And back when I first encountered JavaScript, it was probably sort of about 96, 97, that kind of area. And it was very much in that way. It was kind of a whole copy and paste type thing. You know, JavaScript was very new, and there weren't that many people who knew how to develop in it very well. So I approached it from that complete messy kind of 90s web designer point of view. But then in a serious way, getting involved with JavaScript, it wasn't until the last couple of years. So I wasn't like honing away my JavaScript skills over that time. It was literally just me. You know, I could tell what the language is about. It looked very similar to other languages that I was familiar with, like C, for example. And so I used it in a very, haphazard, ad hoc kind of way until the last couple of years. So that's how I got into it.
It sounds like it's a similar trajectory that other people have shared, where they almost used it in kind of a duct tape kind of way. Is that a fair estimation of how you did it?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. And I think that's true, actually, of people that are coming to the conference, and that's why, we've got so many things about, application structure and all those types of things that perhaps aren't very obvious about JavaScript. We would love to be able to take people coming in who perhaps have that, that experience, that copy and paste experience, to actually saying, okay, yeah, I can actually develop something from scratch. I have a better idea of a language now.
Are you surprised at its adoption rate at all?
I'm more surprised at the lack of adoption rate, in a way. Because JavaScript has been in the browser so long, we've had it, about 15 years or so now, and it's only in the last, you perhaps could count JavaScript's true major popularity as a proper platform for building serious things with from the sort of the Web 2.0 era onwards. So that would put us, about 2004, 2005?
That Ajax period?
Yeah, the whole, the Ajax thing. And I think, Google starting to use it for Google Mail and that kind of era really helped boost it. But if you look at that 10-year gap between 95 and 2005, it was almost just used for, just messing around. Very small, minor things,
Right.
People were still kind of clinging onto this. Perhaps Java will be the big thing that saves us in the browser, and we saw where that went. So I'm more surprised that its adoption rate was so low for such a long time. But then, yes, in the last couple of years, the respect that JavaScript has got and the way that other people are moving from other languages across into JavaScript, I guess that is also surprising. So it's kind of like that hockey stick trajectory. It's like there wasn't much for a long time, but then it's just gone blam in the last couple of years in particular.
What do you attribute that blam to? Where did that popularity come from? Was it a series of things like you were talking about Google with Maps and Gmail, or have there been other things that have added on to that hockey stick moment?
I think we saw a lot of stuff happen with that whole Web 2.0 Ajax kind of thing. People actually started to think, I can't just ignore JavaScript now. It's in all the browsers. I need to start using it. I need to get serious about it. But its performance still isn't that good. There's always problems with it, and I don't know how to develop stuff in it in a modular sense. And enough people started doing JavaScript, though, that over time those types of problems became solved. So, like modules, for example, in JavaScript was a mostly unsolved and a mostly kind of there were several different proprietary ways of doing it, but in terms of having the community agree on anything, it wasn't really until the last few years that became a big deal. So good practices have come up. But another thing that really happened was Google getting into the web developer market with Chrome. And what did that achieve? Well, they developed their V8 engine for running JavaScript, and some of the optimizations and the things they put in really blew JavaScript performance out of the water. It took it from that whole, this is slow and kludgy. You click on something that has JavaScript and it's going to take a second to appear. It really boosted the performance, and I think it also lit a torch kind of under the butts of all the other browser vendors, say, actually, we need to take this JavaScript seriously. We need to do just-in-time compilation as well. And we've seen, in the last few years in particular, the performance just shoot up and up as to where now JavaScript will outperform most other dynamic languages like, your Ruby and Python and things like that for certain types of use cases. So I think it's a combination of all those things. It's the community, it's coming up with the practices, but it's also the technology behind the scenes has really picked up as well in the last few years.
Now, looking forward a bit, how do you see JavaScript evolving in the near term, let's say over the next 2 years or so?
Well, we've seen quite a few improvements in the language spec itself. So there's a big group of people who get together and they have these meetings, because JavaScript is a proper standard, unlike some languages don't have a full proper standardization process. JavaScript does, although it's called ECMAScript in that capacity for various reasons. They are working on new versions of the language all the time. We've seen their work with ECMAScript 5 start creeping into browsers, but they're also working on ECMAScript 6, which has a variety of different names that mean different things in different contexts, like es.next, and sometimes it gets called harmony and things like that. But they're adding some really cool features to the language, and I think with the way that browsers are evolving now, so you can see what we're on now, like Chrome 17, 18, someone might even be watching this video in the future, we're up to Chrome 50 or something.
Right.
Because browsers are updating themselves so quickly now, we don't have this depressing state where it will take, 10 years for, browsers to support a new version of ECMAScript. So we will start to see those things getting quickly, and you'll be able to start using them in probably, ECMAScript 6 will probably be reasonably common in 2 to 3 years' time, I would say. So that's where the language is evolving, but then the community is evolving as well. And, sort of O'Reilly has seen that. The community has evolved, it's come together, and it's, sharing best practices and things like that. And that's why O'Reilly is now like, okay, this is a really cool, time to actually, provide a conference for this group of people that's coming together. So, that's what we're trying to do, and keep things evolving.
Now, I had a question for you about mobile. What role do you see JavaScript having in mobile over that same period, that same 2-year period that we're looking at?
I must admit, mobile isn't one of my biggest points. I guess I'm a little bit of an old stick in the mud when it comes to mobile. I like my desktop apps, but yeah, I mean, JavaScript is a big deal on mobile, and again, it had performance problems, but these are being resolved. Some really good work happening there. We're even seeing Chrome creeping onto Android and things like that. But I guess one trend that we're seeing is that we're seeing companies backing away from native apps to a certain point. So, for example, there's LinkedIn did a blog post this month, which we're in April now, April 2012, and they have pretty much turned most of their app into just JavaScript and HTML5. There's just a small bit of native code to kind of bind it together. We've seen something similar that's going on with the Financial Times. So I think they're even scrapping their iOS app, and they're moving everyone over to a JavaScript and HTML5 based site. So we're seeing that happen a lot, and as long as the vendors don't get too touchy and try and clamp down on this, so not perhaps throwing any names about, but perhaps Apple, for example, as long as they don't, start locking down and saying, the web browser's really, really going to be ultra limited and we're going to add everything just for the native apps. If that doesn't happen, I think we're going to see a lot of people moving from those native apps perhaps back into the HTML5 and JavaScript world, just because the performance is really coming up and the functionality is coming up as well. HTML5, for example, is a really big spec. People haven't had much of it implemented for a long time now, but it's finally getting to that point where we can say, yes, things like, drag and drop, I guess that's a desktop thing, but there's lots of the different parts of the spec that are now actually starting to work on mobile, access to the camera, accelerometers, and things like that. It makes more sense to go that way now if you want the benefits of the web.
So last question for you. I know we've got the Fluent Conference coming up end of May in San Francisco. Yep. What should we be watching for at that event? What are you tracking as we get closer to it?
Well, there's that whole thing about the migration from native to JavaScript and HTML5, because, I mean, I guess maybe this isn't always clear, but O'Reilly Fluent is not just about JavaScript, it is about HTML5 as well. So we have people coming and doing talks about CSS3 and stuff like that as well. It's really about, the kind of the junction point between all of these different technologies. But we're also seeing quite a lot of talks about frameworks, for example. So people that are working on platform as a service type things where you can just develop the front end piece of your app in JavaScript and then talk to their back end, and you don't have to deal with the server side at all. That's a theme that seems to be coming around. But then also people who want to give you these kind of Ruby on Rails style frameworks that work in JavaScript to build these big server side apps in JavaScript if you wish. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And HTML5 game development as well. This is a thing that, as the chairs of the conference, we've been very keen to have represented, because we're seeing a lot of companies moving into doing game development in the browser using JavaScript and HTML5. I think it's going to be a really big thing. And I don't just mean for like sort of cheap Facebook-style games or anything like that. Like, we are actually seeing 3D stuff happening in the browser with WebGL, and people are putting together these kind of Quake-free map renderers, and there's driving games and things like that. So I think that's going to be another big theme at the conference. We're really keen to push that. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and we're keeping an eye on everything, but now we've actually finalised the programme, finally, like a month before the event. Unfortunately, we can't cram too many last-minute things in, but it's been fun, and it's really cool that, when we started this process with the conference 6 months ago, that we have actually had things that have been invented within those 6 months that we've managed to find space for in the conference. So it's going to be really up to date and really exciting. Nice. And I'm going to be looking forward to watching the talks just as much as anyone, I think.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Sounds like we're going to have an of-the-moment event, which is great.
Yeah, that's always good.
Well, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, great. See you at Fluent.
You bet. Here's a look at some of the top stories recently published across O'Reilly. First up, Mike Hendrickson has published his annual 5-part analysis of the computer book market. State of the Computer Book Market is a must-read for publishers and developers alike, and the full report is also available as a free ebook. In a recent interview with Etsy's Mike Britton, we learned that a failure in secondary content doesn't need to take down an entire website. Britton explains how to build resilience into UIs and allow for graceful failures. Finally, in our piece, Big Data in Europe, Big Data Week organizers Stuart Townsend and Carlos Samajano share the distinctions and opportunities of Europe's data scene. As always, links to these stories and other resources mentioned during this episode are available at radar.o'reilly.com/show. During a recent podcast interview, Velocity Chair Steve Souders described himself as an optimization nut. Find out what that means and find out where to find the latest web operations and performance techniques in this episode's video spotlight.
But I'm curious, I've been in editorial in publishing forever, so I can never go anywhere and enjoy myself without finding the errors in someone's writing. Do you do the same thing when you go out on the web? Are you always looking at sites that are slow? Do you find things that are annoying because they're just wrong?
Yeah, I see that all the time. That's, and I use a carrot and a stick. Sometimes I contact people or, give them feedback in some way, and other times I'll write scathing blog posts, highlighting their inefficiencies. But yeah, that's what I do. I'm always seeing that, and of course, one of the reasons why I enjoy my work so much is I'm an optimization nut. Like, I just have to optimize everything, and so every website I go to isn't fast enough, and so I'm always looking, opening up packet sniffers or looking at code, trying to figure out, how could this experience that I had, how could it have been faster?
So when you're doing that, when you're analyzing someone else's site or yours or whoever's, aren't there fluctuations in your connection that you're starting with? So when you connect to the internet, how do you figure out that one day my connection, through I have FiOS at home, is slower than yesterday? Do you know, is there some sort of metric that you're watching to make sure that you're not measuring the slowness of your carrier versus the slowness of a website?
Yeah, you can do things like you can measure your connection speed. There's various tools out there to do that. I just saw yesterday AT&T released this Android plugin called Arrow, A-R-O, that does some of this. I haven't downloaded it yet, but I've read some of their research leading up to this tool. So, there are various tools out there that you can use to measure your connection speed. But it's kind of interesting, like I mentioned the, focus on quality just a minute ago. The two, most popular performance link tools out there are YSlow and PageSpeed. And they both give you a score for how well your site is following these best practices. And neither of them look at your connection speed or your page load time. Neither of them take time into consideration at all. They're just looking at how the site was built. Regardless of whether the page was fast or not, if you're not using sprites, if you're not gzipping your JavaScript, if you're not using a far future expires header, you have low quality. And even if it's pretty fast now, if you adopted these best practices, you could make it even faster. And so, the actual connection speed that you're using, isn't necessarily that important when you're trying to find what should I work on to make my site faster. Now, if you're doing, there are situations where it is, really important. If you're, doing, measuring page load time as part of a continuous build process so that when people add new features before you launch it, you can detect whether it's going to really slow down the user experience. You'd want to do that on some, reliable, repeatable network. So there are ways to do that with DummyNet or, other things. So that is a variable, but actually a lot of the optimizations that you're looking at really hold true regardless of fluctuations in connection speed.
Okay. So how does someone go about finding the latest and greatest tools for performance? I mean, how does a performance engineer, do they go to your site? Where do they go to find the tools? Google? Just Google in performance tools?
Yeah, I feel like I guess we are doing a commercial here a little bit. The jacket I'm wearing today, Velocity. Okay, so, all kidding aside, go to Velocity. We've got 3 of them now. We've got, webcasts that we do, online conferences. And we just started, hats off to O'Reilly. I saw about a month ago the Velocity newsletter has started going out. That's really awesome. So tune into Velocity.
And this podcast series, I may be covering the different tools with the author of the tool.
Yeah. So, like I said, people love this stuff. It's a win. So go to Velocity, tune into Velocity, read my blog. There's a exceptional performance mailing list in Yahoo groups. Just search for exceptional performance. A couple thousand people on the list, very low spam. So that's a good source. There's perfplanet.com. That's run by Sergey out of the New York Web Performance Meetup group, and Stoyan, formerly from the Yahoo Exceptional Performance Group, now over at Facebook. So perfplanet.com, go there. They have an RSS aggregator for a lot of the performance blogs out there. So you could read my blog, Joshua Bixby's blog, lots of other good blogs out there, or just subscribe to the Perf Planet blog. And the other thing Perf Planet does every December is they have their web performance calendar of blog posts.
Yes.
And it's go back all the previous years. This year was 32 articles, all of them really valuable.
All the links and resources mentioned during this episode, including those noted by Steve Souders in the previous segment, are available at radar.o'reilly.com/show. You can always find episodes of O'Reilly Radar at youtube.com/O'Reilly Media and subscribe to episodes through iTunes. That's all we have for now. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.